Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Joining us on today's show is newly Senator-elect Kevin Cramer. Senator Cramer, I guess I can say for the first time, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, John. It's a pleasure.
As we get started, for anybody who might not know, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I'm a North Dakota native, was raised in Kindred, where my mom still lives. I was actually born up in Rolla, and Rolette, actually, in Rolette County. Concordia College graduate, started out in politics pretty young, working for Senator Mark Andrews right out of college, or shortly after college anyway, and worked for the Republican Party. Went to government service in the state with Ed Schaefer. When he was elected governor, I was chairman of the Republican Party and was on his cabinet for 8 years, and really 8 great years, 4 years as tourism director, 4 years as state economic development director, and then went to private sector, more education, private education at the University of Mary. Started a foundation out there in the name of Harold Schaefer, and then went back into government service as a public service commissioner, where I was fortunate to be for nearly 10 years, regulating North Dakota's very dynamic energy industry and economy, and looking out for the environment and consumers, as well as the investment of our energy investors. Before getting elected to Congress in 2012. I've served the last 6 years in the People's House, the House of Representatives, and now I have the great fortune of doing the same in the United States Senate. Well,
with that said, how has the transition been going? Because obviously you're still congressman,
yeah, right.
Up until, but you in this transition, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I went through the transition to be a House member, which was quite different than the transition to the Senate. The nice thing about it is, as a House member for 6 years, I know where all of the resources are. Everything from the restrooms to the cafeteria to payroll to the Office of Management and Budget, or the Congressional Budget Office. All of those resources are very familiar to me, and that's been a tremendous help. The other thing, probably the greatest advantage in this transition, is I have about 15 good, solid North Dakotans that work for me that are coming with me over to the Senate. So I have that foundational staff that has some expertise not only in North Dakota but actually in policy. So we start with that foundation, which means there's not that super sense of urgency to staff up. We are staffing up. You get about 3 times as many staff opportunities in the Senate as the House. I'm not anxious to fill them all because I don't have to be. But it's been a nice, easy transition, and frankly, the United States Senators, Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer in the leadership role, and everyone else have been very, very helpful.
Yeah, so it says you're going to add some staff, but what process are you doing to fill those positions?
So the day after the election, I actually announced a landing spot, if you will, an email address transition at kevincramer.org. That's my campaign site, so that people that have a resume or have an interest in working for me could have a place to send an inquiry. And we've received dozens and dozens of them. I don't know how many. We've gone through the process now of sort of sifting through them, and my chief of staff and other state director and other leadership have been interviewing people. So literally that transition is taking place right now. But I'll probably add over the course of the next year or two 25, 30 more people, but I don't have to do it all at once, and that's a great relief.
Well, let's back up just a little bit. What do you think was the key to your victory over Senator Heidi Heitkamp?
Well, I think the basics are, Senator Heitkamp and I were both elected on the very same day in 2012 by the very same people. And so the voters of North Dakota were able to compare a 6-year term of the two of us side by side, and a lot of the same issues. And I frankly think I had a lot better record of both the policies that I support versus the ones she supports, and a record of accomplishment in the House, in the People's House. So I think people often look at these things and say, well, obviously somebody has to win, somebody comes in second. It doesn't necessarily mean that people don't like one person or the other person. It's just that given the choices in front of them, you have to pick one, and I feel like I had a closer relationship, frankly, with the people of North Dakota perhaps than she did, and again, the fortune of a better record in the People's House.
Okay. With that said, what are some of your thoughts or options maybe for committee assignments as you take on your new position?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the Senate's very different in this regard. In the House, I serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's considered an exclusive committee. It's the broadest jurisdiction of any committee in Congress, the House or the Senate. It covers a whole bunch of topics from healthcare to energy to environment to communications technology, even broadcasters. And so in the Senate, because there are only 100 people for all of those committees, you have many committees. There's a rule in the Republican caucus that prohibits really two Republicans from the same state serving on the same committees. So Senator Hovind's on energy and natural resources, appropriations, he's on agriculture, and he's on Indian affairs. I can't serve on any of those committees, which probably wouldn't make a lot of sense anyway, because now I have the opportunity to complement rather than double up on his committee assignments. It's also, it's also a well-kept secret what everybody's going after right now. But I can say, because I've been quite public, I think a good complement to what Senator Hovind is doing would be in the Environment and Public Works Committee, EPW as they call it. I think most energy policy really is environmental policy anyway. A good deal of the farm policy, particularly the conservation side of farm policy, is also environmental policy. And whether it's the Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife Service, EPA, a lot of the interior agencies, a lot of that falls under EPW. So I've made no secret that would be my first pick of a committee assignment. Beyond that, John, I'd have interest in anything from Armed Services Committee. I've been very active in working for both the Grand Forks and Minot Air Force Bases, as well as the incredible North Dakota National Guard, which has such an important role in our nation's defense. But that's an A+ committee. That's a tough committee for a freshman to get on, but I wouldn't mind that. Commerce would be another area that I'd have interest in, because that's where the technology and communications piece falls in the Senate. Also on what's called the B side, Veterans Affairs is a committee that I'd be very interested in, because North Dakota just has such a disproportionate percentage of our population that is served in conflict and war, and I would really welcome the opportunity to work for them in a committee.
Well, with that said, an interesting look at this, I remember the years of Dorgan, Conrad, and Pomeroy.
Yeah.
Now it's going to be Hovind, Cramer, and Armstrong, both with the same party as the others were. Yeah. Have you had a chance to talk with Senator Hovind and now Congressman-elect Armstrong?
I have. I talked to John a lot, and I talked to Kelly a lot. In fact, with Kelly, we've even looked at things like my office space in North Dakota, and I told him the pros and the cons of where we have offices, whether he'd like to use those offices or not. I think he is going to, at least in a couple of cases. Talk to him about equipment. The nice thing about the House with the 2-year terms, we rotate pretty regularly our IT equipment, things like that. So he's inheriting a lot of really good stuff, and I talked to him about that and talked to him about how I could be helpful. Yeah, he and I, we've compared notes quite a bit. In fact, I had a meeting with the President's Legislative Affairs Director, which is pretty common for senators to get together with people at that high a level. Invited him to the meeting so he could get to know the Legislative Director in the White House. It was something that probably a incoming freshman in the minority party wouldn't get an opportunity to do, before they're sworn in, or probably even shortly, for a while after they're sworn in. So yeah, I want to help more I can be helpful, but also, John, Kelly's really good. He's a good legislator. He's an experienced guy. He's a smart guy. He won't need me to hold his hand, but when he needs help, I'm ready to help him.
Yeah. With that said, you've talked a little bit about some of the committees, but what are some of the key issues that you want to be working on when the of course, new Congress convenes in January?
Yeah, an important question, and it's good today because, of course, we passed a farm bill now that's been reconciled, and the president, by the time this airs, probably will have signed it, and it's a good farm bill for North Dakota. So that takes a major legislative piece off the table for about 5 years. However, it's the implementation of these long-term authorizations that become really important. So I want to be able to observe that, work with the administration through some of that, particularly, again, on the conservation side, the conservation title, how that's carried out, even on the nutrition title and how some of the work requirements and waivers and some of the things that fall on the states get worked out. So that'll be ongoing, John. Certainly our national defense and our homeland security are high priorities. And we're living at a time when We have the immigration issue that looms, where we seem to find it hard to find common ground. The reality is, I think there's lots of common ground, and we just have to somehow deal with the politics of it. So that'll be a high priority. And then just obviously energy and environmental policy is really important to North Dakota's economy and our workforce, and that'll continue to be a high priority for me.
Yeah, well, we want to cover some of those as we go through here. But how do you feel like you will conduct business as a senator? And maybe it's the same. We still do lots of town hall meetings and things. What will be different?
Yeah, so it's interesting because in North Dakota, of course, being an at-large congressman, unlike most other places in the country, there's already this relationship with the entire state that I have that most House members don't have with their entire state. So in that regard, the population's the same, the land mass is the same, the industries are the same, the stakeholder groups are all the same. The difference being, how you use your time. I fully expect that I'll have every bit as many town halls and radio town halls, television appearances, use all of the formats. And here's where the larger staff and a larger budget comes in. So a senator's office has about 3 times the budget and staff as a House member's office. I want to be able to utilize every bit of technology and all the tools to remain as intimately connected with every North Dakotan as I have in the House, and I'd look forward to doing that. So I don't see that changing much, if at all.
Well, now as we record this, and just a few days before, what about immigration and what's going on with possibly a government shutdown?
Yeah, so the immigration issue, of course, it's the wall that's the big stumbling block right now. The good thing about a shutdown, John, is that 3/4 of the government is funded through the fiscal year. So this is different than previous deadlines that loomed, in other Congresses. National defense is already funded through the fiscal year, as are a lot of things, like I said, 3/4 of the government. What's not funded through the fiscal year, in fact, it expires on Friday, December 21st, is Homeland Security, Commerce and Justice, Agriculture actually is not funded. So about 1/4 of the discretionary budget that's not funded. But the president also gets to determine what's essential. So in a shutdown, essential services continue to be operational, and I would think Homeland Security would be a pretty high one, whether it's TSA or borders and all of those things, air traffic control. So I don't think it'll be nearly as disruptive if it happens, but we still have to deal with this Homeland Security issue and the immigration issue. The wall is, again, the very specific stumbling block, but there are lots of things in immigration that Democrats want, and there are lots of things that Republicans want. There are lots of things that both of them want, whether it's H-2A reforms, that's the seasonal workers, farm workers, H-1B reform, which is very important to me as it relates to high-skilled workforce, our doctors and surgeons and engineers and software developers that they're so important to North Dakota's economy. There are a lot of areas of agreement, and we need to find some of those and demonstrate to the public that we can pass them in a bipartisan way. In the areas where there's disagreement, perhaps, I think the president actually has done it rather well. He just hasn't, somehow hasn't closed the deal, and that is whether you're talking about DACA immigration or you're talking about, work visas or merit-based immigration, family connections. There's out of every 4 things, there's probably 3 things everybody agrees on. It's just that what they disagree on are different things, and they don't want the other person to get these 3 things if they can't get this one thing, or they don't want them to get this one thing, even if it means getting these 3 things. And somehow we've got to break through that. Somehow we've got to be willing politically to say, I'm willing to give you that if you're willing to give me this, and then all these other important things can get done at the same time. Some people like comprehensive attempts. Some people like to take each one of them up separately. I think it's unfortunate when what I consider low-hanging fruit, that is the stuff that's easy, gets caught up in the political fights. I'd prefer to get that stuff done easy, get that stuff done quickly. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, because as long as that wall and the funding for it is on the table, it seems like the politics just becomes almost too difficult for reasonable people to deal with. And yet, there's nothing like a looming deadline of a potential shutdown to get people to compromise.
Well, and you kind of answered this question, but what is the answer to solving it? because I heard a story just recently about, is it a combination of wall technology and personnel, or
Yes.
just what is it? Yeah.
Yes, it is. I think it is. But some people want personnel, some people want technology, and some people want a wall. And I think the answer to your question is it's all of those things.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to what you talked about a little bit, mentioned oil, energy, obviously huge in North Dakota's economy. How do you see yourself supporting or doing that in the Senate for North Dakota?
So this is where I've really made my mark as much as any place in the House. Although I'd have to say in agriculture as well, I have my fingerprints all over this current farm bill and the previous farm bill. But in energy, it's where I probably make the largest contribution to the effort in the Congress itself, because I've got a background in it. And I think there's wonderful opportunity to be environmental stewards, as we are in North Dakota, to be more efficient in the production, as we are in North Dakota and have proven to be with technological advancements. But John, the real opportunity, I believe, exists beyond our borders. And that is, with the lifting of the oil export ban of a few years ago, and the opportunity to sell into the global marketplace, and with the disruptions of things, for example, in Europe and their dependence on Moscow for natural gas, and our opportunity with this rich natural gas in the United States and exporting, we have a great opportunity to actually use the productive exploration and recovery of oil and natural gas and other minerals as a tool, if you will, in international peace. And so I see my role as being one of technical expertise as well as diplomacy. And we have the resources that the world needs, and we get to play in the global marketplace. And I think I look forward to playing a role in that. In America's not just energy independence, but energy security, and really energy security for the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is a big role. And so anyway, we're going to turn to another big subject matter, I guess. Let's talk about the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
A big issue in your campaign, obviously, and I guess recently a Texas judge has declared it unconstitutional. We've been involved, North Dakota has, with that. What are sort of the next steps now in that matter?
Yeah, so here's an area where I'm going to be eternally optimistic, and I know I tend to be optimistic most of the time anyway, but I think that this judge has handed us an opportunity to prove that a divided government can work well for the people of this country. In many respects, John, I think it was a mistake for either or both sides to refer to the Affordable Care Act as Obamacare. For Democrats, they were going to defend it no matter what because they felt like they were defending their president. For Republicans, they were going to kill it, we were going to repeal it and replace it no matter what because it's named after their president. And I always felt that was an unfortunate strategy, but both sides seemed to like it. I think now with a little distance, and from his presidency, another election under our belts, and the judge putting down this new marker, realizing, of course, that he didn't do an injunction, and that for now the Affordable Care Act remains the same until it's appealed through the courts, which it'll no doubt go all the way to the Supreme Court. That'll take months, if not more than a year. It presents an opportunity for us as statesmen and as legislators and as a divided government to find again, like we talked about earlier in other issues, immigration, find that common ground, and then find the best ideas of each side and meld them into something that we can pass. In the meantime, the president's done a pretty good job of where he can in some areas that have helped slow down the growth of the price of premiums and things like association plans that he's implemented in executive order. Bringing down the cost of drugs by implementing streamlining the process to generics, eliminating the gag rule. He's also, he's just done some nice things within the rules that allow us to have some hope. Now it's just time for Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate to find, again, that common ground and the best ideas of both sides and hopefully come up with a plan. The judge's rule, it was interesting because the judge's rule didn't directly mirror the lawsuit, or certainly not the position of the administration. The judge simply ruled that the individual mandate is no longer constitutional since there's no longer a tax or a penalty attached to not buying health insurance, and you couldn't sever, if you will, that one issue from the entire law. I understand that. We all, I think, understand that. But again, it presents the opportunity and the challenge to do something together.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Change subjects here. Are you hopeful there'll be some end to the trade war with China? What might actually happen?
Yeah, I'm not only hopeful. I think I think I see the end of it, but it'll depend a lot on China. I mean, let's face it. China has been allowed by this government to rip us off for decades. I don't think there's almost no denial of that. The problem is that while they continue to push and push and push and steal our technology, demand an intellectual transfer to do business with them. As their population grows, they've been using their growing economy to build armaments unlike anything we've seen, even build their own islands, if you will, in the South China Sea. So somebody had to call them to account, and that's what this president has done. But China has more to lose than we have. This is something that's intuitive to Donald Trump. He always says it, and some people tend to not believe it. But China's economy is crashing. Their markets are crashing. Their dominance, their desire for dominance will not be realized if they don't engage in trade with the United States. And so we've seen them now come back to the table. I think this 90-day truce is a very good first step. We've already seen one of the largest purchases of U.S. soybeans in our history from China, backed up by another one shortly after that. We're seeing them promise to make some adjustments to how they deal with intellectual property and technology. If they can put something substantive in place, I think that we'll have a deal.
Yeah. With that said, though, what's been the impact of the tariffs on North Dakota farmers thus far, and what will it be like for the near future?
It certainly created some anxiety for some, but by and large, I have to tell you that the farmers I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of them, and continue to talk to a lot of them, they hedged, they sold when it was high, they stored as much as they could store, but beans eventually overwhelm every elevator. And we're glad to see it's finally moving now. But we talk about the impact. The impact only comes into play when you make the sale. So the price going up or down, or up and down, again, creates some anxiety. It challenges your marketing timing, of course. A lot of it depends on your relationship already with your banker and your personal circumstances. Everybody's is a little bit different. But there's no question that the passage of a 5-year farm bill and now the movement in the right direction, the passage of the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade deal, the South Korean trade deal, entering into bilaterals with Europe, Japan, these are all moving in the right direction. And I think that we're going to see, into the future, we're going to see not only minimal disruption, but great upside in the long term.
Okay. Well, again, we're trying to cover so many subjects here. Do you expect investigations into the Trump administration to start now that the Democrats have won the House? And how do you feel about that?
Sure, I think that they'll probably do some of that. It is one of the legitimate roles of a government, of course, of the legislative branch, is to do oversight. However, how aggressive they get will depend on how they calculate the outcome politically. With the presidential election coming up in the next term, and people don't like to see the presidency disrupted too much, because the presidency is a pretty darn important institution. And so they do it at their own risk if they get too aggressive with it. And I suspect it won't be nearly as aggressive as the early talk. That's my guess.
Okay. Well, also, President Trump has labeled the press as an enemy of the people. Do you believe the press is enemy of the people?
Well, first of all, I don't like putting anybody into one giant box and assuming that they're all the same, because they're clearly not. I will tell you that the Washington Press Corps, the New York Press Corps, is different than the North Dakota Press Corps. Even at that, though, I have many good friends in the Press Corps in Washington. I have some people that I'm not as fond of in terms of the work they do, but love them personally. I don't see the press as the enemy of the people. I think that I understand his rhetoric in that regard, but God knows we have to have them, because not only does the Constitution, does the Constitution require a free press, but we're best served by it. All of that said, however, John, I do worry at the federal level, at the national level, that the right to a free press has become a license to be a bad press. And I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think a harassing reporter in the White House is entitled to be in the White House. The press is entitled by the Constitution to cover politics, but they're not entitled to the perks of an office in the West Wing of the White House. And so somehow we need to find some discipline. Paul Harvey used to always say, self-governance without self-discipline leads to self-destruction. So we all have a role.
Okay. Here's just a sidebar question. Are you glad you no longer have to run every 2 years for election?
People ask that all the time, and when it dawns on somebody in Washington that I'm an at-large congressman, like a third senator running every 2 years, they feel sorry for me. And I have to tell you, the one thing about the 2-year terms, I call them 2-year out clauses. You also have the option every 2 years not to run if you don't want to. I like running. I like the campaign because I like the engagement with people. So I never minded the 2-year terms. That said, the founders created a 6-year term for the Senate to provide them a little breathing space, to be the statesman, to look out for the betterment of the entire country while also looking out for your constituents. And so I'm sure I'll find some relief in that.
Well, Senator, we're almost out of time. If people want more information, where's the best place for them to go right now?
So what I would say is, as of January 3rd, my transition or my Senate webpage will be active, and that's kramer.senate.gov. kramer.senate.gov. In the meantime, go to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, probably Facebook and Twitter. You'll get the most updated information. At Rep Kevin Cramer right now, that will be switched over to, I think it's at Senate Kevin Cramer on January 3rd. So social media is always a good place to catch us until we catch up to you at the town hall.
Well, thanks for joining us today, and best of luck to you in your new position.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Post this week, and as always, thanks for watching.
Funding provided by the members of Prairie Public.